Hi everybody, I hope you're having a good time together in your Connect groups this week. We're continuing in Hebrews chapter 11, that hall of faith, where we get to look a little bit at the cloud of witnesses, people who have lived by faith before us, who are leading us in how to follow Jesus faithfully. And we're spending a second week with Abraham this week, and we're going to consider a little bit of what it means to throw things off that hinder. Usually when we think about throwing off things that hinder, we think about bad things, throwing off bad habits, sinful ways of thinking. This week we're going to look at what it might look like to throw off something good that could still be a hindrance. I'm going to read from Hebrews 11, verses 17 through to 19. It says this: By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. You can read the whole of that story if you want to in Genesis chapter 22. And we're not going to dwell on this, but it's just worth saying quickly. The Bible never endorses child sacrifice. God never demands child sacrifice. This is a very rare one-off instance where God reveals Abraham's heart. And that's what he's pursuing, and he never actually commands the sacrifice of a child. But Abraham is this extraordinary man who, him and his wife, their lives have been defined by the promises of God. They have good things, and all those good things have come from God's promises. And perhaps the two most definitive promises are one, that they would have this miraculous son. They were old, childless people, and then God promised them a son in their old age, and they had Isaac. And then that through Isaac, they would have offspring that would become a great nation. Good things, clearly from God, that they rightly loved, I'm sure were protective over and attached to. And so when God brings this command to him to surrender, to sacrifice his son Isaac, it must have been crushing. And he must have been tempted to rationalize away that command, to say, I know that God has said this, but surely I can't be expected to let go of, to lose all the good things that he's given me, all the good things that he's promised me that haven't yet come true in my life, all the things I'm waiting on that Isaac is the linchpin of. Surely he's not asking me to throw all of that away. There must have been huge internal debate and wrestling for him to come to the point that he comes to, that he's praised for here in Hebrews, where he chooses to let go of the good, godly thing that he rightly loves. And the only way, we read, the only way that he's able to do that is by believing that God is able to do something entirely impossible to redeem the situation. As far as Abraham can tell, in his obedience, he's about to destroy God's promises. He's about to destroy all the future that he believes is coming. He's going to do the damage, and he's trusting God is going to be able to redeem and reconcile the situation, to bring it back in track with the promises. Have you ever experienced anything that felt at all like this? We're all used to giving up bad things, aren't we? And we spend lots of time as a society in general, but certainly as Christians, talking about what bad things can we get rid of in our lives? How can we cut out harmful things where everyone looks in and agrees together, yes, that's bad, we want to get rid of that. It's a different thing to work to get rid of, to let go of, to lay down good things in your life. Things that you might have had to really fight for, or really trust God for in the first place through long, hard seasons. Things that only came through faith and dependence and obedience, and now are tangible evidences of God's love and goodness in your life. to lay down those things again, that's another thing entirely. Maybe a job or a relationship or a ministry role or possessions, or I don't know. You have to think about what are some of the good, precious things that you know God has given you in your life that it would be tremendously hard to lay down. And maybe you have had experiences where making an obedient decision seems to risk harm to that very good thing that God has given you. And that tension point is where we discover if we have idols in our lives, isn't it? That's the moment where we figure out, oh, is this just something I'm thankful for, or is this an idol? Where God has given us something, and the moment comes to let go of it again, and we find that we struggle to let it go because it's become precious to us in some other unique way, whether it's a possession or a person. And it does seem particularly loving, relational Christian people do this with other people. We can idolize other people very easily. Family members, children, parents, community members. And what can happen is we can be tempted to kind of drop out of the race at this point, as though we're accepting a halfway prize. Say, I'm going to take what God has given me so far and call this my whole prize, and I will treasure that. And I'm not going to run the race with Jesus anymore because I'm too happy with what I have now. And to take another step with him would be to risk the thing that I have now. And I dare not risk this. So I'm out of the race. It's a kind of choosing the gift over the giver. We can do this as individuals in lots of ways. We can certainly do this as a church in lots of ways. And I think that the call that we get from Abraham's life is to trust God with the scary outcomes of obedience. That takes a particular kind of faith in his character. To say, God, if I obey you, as far as I can tell, it is going to damage or risk harm to the good things that you've given me that I love just the way they are. But I trust you and I know what you've called me to. And so I'll act in obedience. And I will trust you with the scary outcomes of that obedience. Abraham obviously didn't have to go through with that sacrifice. But God went through with that same sacrifice. He's given us his only son. And through his son, even through the death of his son, has still produced offspring as numerous as the stars and made those offspring into a great nation, and has brought that son back to life and redeemed that whole situation and redeemed millions through that. And so we can trust, we can look to that and say, even though I don't know if I would have the courage to do what Abraham did, I'm thankful that God has done something that I could never do. And so I can look at that and trust God with the scary outcomes of obedience, with all the things that seem to be risked when I choose to say yes to God. I can trust him that he'll be good and faithful to me in all those things. Why don't you have some conversation together, and maybe, if you feel able, discuss what are some of the things in our individual lives that are good gifts from God that might be difficult to lay down. And maybe some of the things that as a church, what are some things as a church that we know are good and gifts from God, but we don't want to get distracted into loving above the giver. Let's challenge each other in our conversation to keep pursuing Jesus and not just be satisfied with what he's given us for this moment and today's promises, but to keep pursuing the eternal promise and running with him day after day, even if it risks some of the sweet things that he is giving us day by day, here and now. These are those great verses from chapter 12 to close us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Love you all. See you soon.